How loud am I? Oh, it's not so bad. Okay, so we have our next to last readings, which were pretty short, really. We had the last like 9 chapters or 7 chapters of Acts, and then the first handful of chapters of Philippians. Actually, I said Philippians 1 through 4, but I think there are only like 4 chapters in Philippians. Yes, there are only 4 chapters in Philippians. So all of Philippians, all of 2nd Timothy. One, a pastoral epistle written by Paul to a friend, Timothy, who was dealing with some things. Another, Philippians, written from prison, a prison epistle. And then Acts, which is the end of Paul's life, more or less. Like the last few journeys that he goes on. And I wanted to talk about Acts first, really. Here in chapter 23, Paul has been, I got one. Paul has been nearly beaten. So this is, I think we ended up talking about this last week somehow, and as I was reading this week, I was thinking to myself, how did we get on this last week when we weren't supposed to? But I probably did it, because I tend to, clearly I'll be thinking about the next week while we're still talking about last week. But so Paul has very nearly been beaten, and then, he asks, like, oh, is this a lawful thing that we do now? We beat Roman citizens without a trial, and then he puts the whole thing on ice, and so he's taken by the guards. He's sort of protected, and Paul is he's in a bad way, right? The crowd wants him dead. Matter of fact, here in 23:12, it says, in the morning, just to give you a sense of how badly they wanted him to die. In the morning, the Jews joined in a conspiracy, and they bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink until they have killed Paul. Eating, I can understand. But drinking, I mean, you put yourself on a real time clock there. Like, you got 3.5 days max to get the job done, or you're going to be in a bad space. But he is in custody, and verse 11 says this. It says, that night the Lord stood near Paul and said, keep up your courage, for just as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must bear witness also in Rome. And Paul seems to take this to heart. He doesn't ever really complain about his situation. Do you notice this? He mentions it in his letters. He's like, well, I'm in chains here. Actually, toward the end of Acts, he says this to Festus, cousin Festus. He says, oh, darn it. Well, I can't find it, but this is what he says. He is talking with Festus, and he says, listen, Festus, that is, says, Paul, all this learning has has melted your mind. You are speaking like a crazy person. Here you go. But Paul said, I'm not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I'm speaking the sober truth. And then he goes on to tell, he's like, makes this little appeal. And he says, King Agrippa, you believe the prophets. I know that you believe. And Agrippa says to Paul, are you so quickly persuading me to become a Christian? Right? And Paul says, whether quickly or not, I pray to God that not only you, but also all who are listening to me today might become such as I am, accepting the chains that are around me, right? He doesn't ever complain. He talks about his life being poured out as a drink offering before God. He talks about all the things that have happened to him. Indeed, if he does anything with all of those hardships, it is a form of boasting. And he calls it out as such. He's like, well, if I'm going to boast, I'll boast in the things that demonstrate my own weakness, right? But he doesn't make a big deal out of it. He doesn't complain that it's happening to him. And I find that incredible. I haven't done a Taco Tuesday in a long time, but I was going to do one because on Mother's Day, I preached about Paul and about how he had been transformed and yada, yada, yada. And just like I had mentioned, just how quickly things get under our skin, right? And how we all deem ourselves because it was the greatest Artemis of the Ephesians sermon, right? And how we like to think that we're like all intellectual and we've got it, we're buttoned up, but really a lot of the time we get poked and don't even realize that we're tender in that spot, and there we go, we're screaming, great as Artemis of the Ephesians for 2 hours. And I was just reminded of how stupid and petty I am on Sunday. So I didn't have time to cook on Sunday. I'm busy in the morning, didn't have things to do. Was busy the Saturday before, so I had planned just to buy Colleen whatever dinner she wanted. And Colleen's favorite thing in the world is Torchy's queso, and it's delicious queso. And we both really like Gloria's, so she wanted Gloria's. So I called Gloria's to put it in order, and nobody answered the phone. And then nobody answered the phone again. And then I finally got somebody on the phone, and they said, we're not taking takeout orders today. I said, what do you mean you're not taking takeout orders today? Well, we're really busy, so we're not taking takeout orders today. We'll start again tomorrow. And you'd have thought that you told me that I was going to get fired from my job. I was so upset. I was like, I was flabbergasted on the phone. I was like, really? You're not taking takeout? Like, what? Why? Well, we're busy. Okay, I said in my most sarcastic tone. And then we hung up. I was not particularly proud of my behavior. I wasn't a jerk. I wasn't particularly kind either. And then it took me forever to get hold of the people at Medea. And I was like, geez, today is just not my day. And I was like all bent out of shape about the privilege of ordering takeout food. Like, give me a break, right? But I have come to assume that if I have the expendable income to purchase takeout food, that it should be available to me on my own terms, right? How dare you not take takeout orders because you're understaffed and life is a living hell in the restaurant anyway, right? It's hard to work in a restaurant. If you haven't ever worked in a restaurant, you should go back in time and chide your former self for not working in a restaurant, because it is difficult work. But yeah, so I was just reminded of how much I take for granted, how much I expect, right? the world to work in the ways that I think it should work. And I think I'm so far I think I'm so far from the sort of character that Paul demonstrates, where like everything is going wrong for him, right? He spends his final days not in a nice retirement family over at Teresa's house, but in prison, under house arrest. And what does he spend his time doing? Writing letters, teaching anybody that will come to him about Jesus. What does it say here? He lived there, that is, in Rome, under house arrest, for 2 whole years at his own expense. And after these 2 years, we suppose that he was killed. He lived there 2 whole years at his own expense, and he welcomed all who came to him, proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance. The end of the book of Acts. That's the life of Paul. That's all we hear about it. It is really, truly incredible. And it's not just that he did these things. It wasn't just that he had all the words to say or wanted to. It is to me, the remarkable thing is the character that he demonstrated in all of that. How do you get that? How do you get that? Yeah. Tell us.
Is there a chance that he did what you suggested this past Sunday sermon, that he had made his amends and that he was just cruising on down till the end?
This is a guy. The answer is yes. This is a guy who writes in Philippians, I had considered just reading the whole chapter of Philippians, the whole first chapter of Philippians to you, but I'm just going to read this section. I want you, he is in jail right now, writing this letter. I want you to know, beloved, that what has happened to me has actually helped to spread the gospel, so that it has become known through the whole imperial guard and to everyone else that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers and sisters, having been made confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, dare to speak the word with greater boldness and without fear. Some proclaim Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. These proclaim Christ out of love, knowing that I have been put here for the defense of the gospel. The others proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but intending to increase my suffering in my imprisonment. But what does it matter? Just this, that Christ is proclaimed in every way, whether out of false motives or true. And in that, I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice. For I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance. It is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be put to shame in any way. A man on house arrest, he knows he's going to die. Right? He knows it. Nero is on the throne at this point. Things are not looking good. It's my eager expectation and hope that I will not be put to shame in any way, but that by my speaking with all boldness, Christ will be exalted now as always in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, living is Christ, and dying is gain. If I'm to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me. And I don't know which I prefer. I'm hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and to be with Christ, for that's far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary for you. Since I'm convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with all of you for your progress and joy and faith, so that I may share abundantly in your boasting in Christ Jesus when I come again to you. Only live your life in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent and hear about you, I will know that you are standing firm in one spirit, striving side by side with one mind for the faith of the gospel, and are in no way intimidated by your opponents. For me, living is Christ, and dying is gain. He has this sense of, he uses, by the way, somewhere here, I forgot to write it down. He uses here somewhere in Philippians the same words that Jesus uses to him when he is in the custody of the Romans. When Jesus comes and says, "Have courage," right? What does he say? "Keep up your courage, for just as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must bear also witness in Rome." Paul uses that same phrase to these folks in Philippians. Keep up your courage. Just keep it up, right? You're going to be okay. But Paul seems to think that whatever befalls him is going to be okay. I'm not sure that he has a sense of what exactly that's going to be, right? Whether I come again to you or whether I hear about you, right? Let the words that I hear about you be positive. Let me know that you're keeping steadfast in the faith. He seems far from being angry that he spends his final years in custody and in house arrest. He seems to think that all of these things are opportunities for him to spread the gospel, and is pleased with that, right? Guys, what's happened to me has actually helped to spread the gospel. I got to share this good news with all the imperial guard. Can you believe it? Look how good God is. That's amazing. And it's amazing that he is leveraging his position with all of these people that he wouldn't have met to share what is the great hope for him, right? And it's not just, I think, have any of you been approached like in the grocery store by somebody that's trying to help you meet Jesus? No? Sharon has. So I don't know if she shared with you. I haven't shared it, I don't think, from the pulpit, but when we came down here to interview, Colleen went with a few members of the PNC to the Castle Park over there, the one they just recently redid. And they were over there, the kids were playing, and we brought the kids down. And some random ladies were like, "Hey, can we tell you about Jesus?" She's like, "I know about Jesus. Like, we're actually visiting here because my husband's a pastor. We know about Jesus." And they were like, "But really, do you know about Jesus?" She's like, "I promise. Like, we know about Jesus. We're good to go, right?" And so, but this whole like evangelistic fervor can feel very transactional, right? Like, I need you to do this so that I can feel like I did something good, right? Or I need you to hear this because my pastor told me that I'm supposed to share the good news. I had a discussion with somebody the other day whose pastor told them that the point of Christianity isn't so that they can have a relationship with Jesus, but in order that they can make disciples of Jesus. And that seemed like the most nonsense thing I had ever heard in my entire life. What are you discipling people into? What is the point? If it isn't to have some experience, some overwhelming experience of the depths of God's love for you. Why would I share some beliefs that only reside in my head, right? I don't feel passionate. Actually, I think I preached on that a couple of weeks ago, right? I think that was the Cosmic Crisp sermon, actually, right? Like, I feel very strongly about Cosmic Crisp. Apparently, I need to open my heart to envy apples. Didn't know this until tonight. But yeah, that's not, I don't feel so strongly about them that I'm going to lay my life on the line for it, or like try to make converts in the grocery. Well, I might try to make converts in the grocery store. If I saw somebody like trying to buy Gala apples or something, I might try to save them. But it feels to me like Paul isn't doing the transactional thing, right? If you're the sort of person who has experienced God in the ways that Paul has experienced God, if you're the sort of person that can be imprisoned and shipwrecked and all of these things, beaten and stoned and all of this stuff, and count it all joy because you had the opportunity to share this experience that you had with somebody else, doesn't seem like Paul is telling the Imperial Guard that they need to believe these three things because he knows them and he thinks they should know them too. Seems to me like Paul actually wants to share like a deep and abiding hope that he has experienced. He wants to share it because it has transformed his life. Because it's a thing that he doesn't know how he would live without. I mean, he certainly gave everything up for it, right? Paul will tell you, he was the Jewiest Jew of all time, right? Student of Gamaliel, Jew of Jews, Abraham's son, right? Like he was as in it to win it as he could possibly be. And he was like, then I met this Jesus guy, and I realized that none of my works and my heritage really mattered all that much, but I was desperately loved and invited into this work to tell the world that everybody's in. It's crazy. It's really, really crazy. He uses every single opportunity to tell the story of his life. That's what's really remarkable to me about these last chapters. If you didn't have a chance to read them, I mean, you can read them in a half an hour. He takes, every time he's in front of a group of people, they're like, make a case for yourself. Because what has happened is that they were making the case that he was being riotous. And he's like, I wasn't. I was finishing the purification rituals actually to try to quell the problem that might have arisen had I not done the purification rituals. And so he's before a bunch of different people, and they keep saying, well, make a defense for yourself. Here are the charges. And every single time, he tells the story again about him and Jesus on the road to Damascus. Every single time. He's like, well, this thing happened to me. Like, I don't know what else to tell you except for this thing happened to me, and it changed my life. What do you think? Ed suggested that Paul had actually just had his, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain moment, where he didn't have to hold on to anything anymore, so he could receive all of these trials as a gift and opportunity to share this thing that had transformed his life. What do you think it might take for you to trust in a God? I mean, because we want to blame God so much for everything that happens, right? And it's real easy to get into like a victim mentality where we're like, well, this thing happened and you're supposed to protect me from this. And instead, here we are, and I don't feel very protected, and I feel like you're a million miles away. Meanwhile, Paul's getting stoned to death. Like, literally, people are trying to kill him and taking vows to murder him. And he's like, isn't this great, you guys? Actually, God did this, and I got to do all these neat things. It's just an incredibly alien mindset. And I'm over here getting worked up over the fact that I can't order Glorias on Sunday. It's shameful. It's shameful. But what do you think it takes?
Does it have to be an either or? When I was young, especially, I had a hard time with that passage.
Mm,
I wanted to live to see my kids and grandkids grow up.
for sure.
I didn't want to die.
Yeah.
So can't we live for Christ and still count a gain when we die, instead of making it an either or right now? Doesn't matter whether I live or die. It seems like he only had about 3 years to live after he wrote this. Maybe
Yeah.
2.
Max, yeah. Yeah, probably 2.
They didn't have LSD then, did they? 'Cause he might have been on that.
I don't think so, but you want to talk about LSD, come to worship next Sunday. We're talking about Revelation this week, so. I just heard a story about.
Ropes on the tent.
That's right.
I just feel like he's the founder of the Optimist Club. I mean, the cup is never half empty, it's always half full.
Yeah.
He really seems to take anything that comes his way and convert it into some kind of positive response. So that's a pretty cool way to be about anything that comes at you.
It is, and again, like to the point of my sermon this week, I would really like to start living that way in my 40s rather than in my 80s, right? Or my 90s. Like Paul, I don't know how old we think Paul was. If he dies in 64, he's like maybe 60, probably. But yeah, I would love to make the switch earlier than later, and I don't think it necessarily has to be I want to die. I mean, I think that there's a sense. My God, you guys probably know or have had a grandparent that said that they wanted to die for years before they died. My grandma was like that. She was like, I'm ready to go, Jake, for like 10 years before she died. I'm ready to go. I love you guys. I'm ready to go. And that was fine and very much her personality. But yeah, I don't think we have to actually want to go.
In prison, do you think it was a foregone conclusion in his head that he was going to die soon?
Probably. I think likely. Given the tone of the letters that he writes, right? They're so gentle, like so full of pathos that I can't imagine that Paul believes he's going to have another chance to say anything again to them, right? If you're going to leave a letter behind to somebody that you love, it's going to say all the things you need to say in a way that hopefully is as full of love as you can make it, right? What do you make of the end of Paul's life? What do you make out of this transition that he seems to make or be able to make from victim to participant in what God is doing around him, in him? How do we get out of victim mindset and more into participant mindset, right? Like, this is what life has given me. How it is really a question. It's a hard one to ask. Certainly in the moment, it's hard to ask, right? How is it possible that God could possibly squeeze any good out of this thing that has befallen me?
I find it more genuine when Jesus says on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to Paul being in prison and saying, hey, we'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Is this one of his letters that scholars believe that he wrote?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess the breadth, it the overriding, um, the overriding image that is resonant for me about spirituality and living in general is this being rooted image, right? Like a tree by streams of water. I always have in my head this image of a tree with its roots just like wrapped around rock underneath the ground, right? Such that like life happens to it, but and it's hard, right? Some branches fly off. We had some wind the other night. You probably had branches all over your neighborhood too. I had a whole tree. I had a very strange experience. I walked the dog at about 7:30. I walked up my street and around our block, didn't notice anything weird. 15 minutes later, Colleen is driving somewhere and she texts me a picture. Holy cow, did you see this? A tree is down in the middle of our street. I did not see it. There's no way it happened in those 15 minutes. Where was I? At any rate, it doesn't mean that life isn't going to be hard, that your branches aren't going to be bruised and broken, but that you have the sense of rootedness, that sometimes that rootedness allows you the breadth of saying, screaming, yelling, my God, why have you forsaken me, right? Jesus knew who he was. He was also a human being. But that's what, and also over here you get Paul at the end of his life being like, isn't this grand that I've been imprisoned? And I've gotten to share the gospel with these guards. And in the middle, you get these crazy visions of like Stephen, who is being stoned, and like his face looks like an angel, and he sees the heavens opened, and then he gets stoned to death. Like, it's a range, right, of human experience that we're going to have. All of these, though, I think, are people who have known who they are and who holds them, which allows us to both scream in rage and also to have a sense of hopeful expectation even in the midst of really deep and desperate trials.
Do you think Paul is saying that to the Philippians, whatever trials and tribulations you go through, you can have hope, and if you can have faith like I have faith, you can overcome this? Or is he just saying, this is my testimony?
I think he's saying this is my testimony. I think that's the best that Paul can do. I think next week we'll see in Revelation that is a book of, it's a book of hope, right? It's of hope. Here's some crazy crap that you will see, and all of this is leading to your deliverance. Like, this is the end of the story is good for you. And I think Paul writes so much about the cross. And he writes about the cross because the cross is a symbol of hope for him, right? A symbol. What else are you going to hang on to when you're being stoned? Well, you're going to identify with the Savior who also suffered on your behalf, knows what it's like to suffer, and whose suffering ended in resurrection, right? And so I guess that as an image is, I think, really helpful for us in terms of what character development might look like, what spiritual development might look like, what spiritual maturity might look like, as we head to attempting a place, arriving at a place where we can say, I just don't feel the need to complain about my situation anymore. I'm going to assume that God is at work here and try to participate in that in whatever way that I can.
Does that short circuit, I need to dominate this, but does this short circuit the stages that we go through when we're facing death?
Nope.
Does this allow room to bargain,
I don't-
be angry,
Yeah.
With all the stuff that we face.
Yeah. Sure it does. And I think anybody that tells you that it doesn't leave room for, a journey that looks like this or comes back to the start, is not allowing for the fact that we're human beings, right?
How do you describe Paul's journey with your finger?
Well, I almost printed out for you a map of his journeys, and he goes around like this and then loops big around. But I think that is probably also his emotional journey as a person. I mean, listen, it doesn't start out easy for him. He is a Jew who hopes, I think, to be a minister to the Jews, and ends up not being able to minister to his own people because they won't have him, right? Like, he becomes the minister to the Gentiles because his own people won't have him. Talk about a death and resurrection moment for him prior to his own real death and resurrection. Like, his whole hope, I think, for what his ministry might have been is murdered, is dead on the vine. They don't want to have it. They're not going to have it. They're definitely not going to have it from him, right? Because of who he is. And so he has to reimagine himself. And, he gets a lot of help in reimagining himself because the Lord's like, do this instead. Go here. Talk to these people. And that's helpful. But I think Paul was on a journey himself. I mean, I think that Paul was likely a very different person before the scales fell from his eyes, after the scales fell from his eyes, after he got beaten, shipwrecked, and stoned a bunch of times, and then here at the end of his life when he's in a prison cell. Like, all those things had to have formed him. It wasn't like he found himself blind in the presence of Ananias, and Ananias is like, hey, Brother Saul, your scales are going to fall off, and they fell off, and Paul is a magically different person. Like, that happens. Like, I personally know people who were alcoholics and Jesus found them, and they had an experience in a church, and they were not alcoholics anymore. Like, it happens. Like, I can give you the phone number of people that it has happened to that are 30 years sober because of something that happened to them in a moment. But for most of us, those scales don't just fall off our eyes like that. Like, it is a process, and you have to work at everything. And hopefully, our character is such that we can say, well, that was, that person's experience was to the glory of God, and so is my slog of an experience also to the glory of God. And God shows up in just as powerful ways, sustaining my struggle day to day in these ways that I'm trying to grow up, right? These ways that I'm trying not to be upset about queso. Yeah, Paul? Mm-hmm. 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 I think expectation matters a whole awful lot, right? Yeah. If you don't expect to hear, you won't, right? If you expect to have a really crummy time at the Mean Girls musical, you probably will. But if you go with a sense of, oh, this is going to be great. I mean, it's church every week, right? This is going to be a crummy experience. I guess I just have to go. You probably will not like it very much. But if you show up with a sense of like, The living God might speak to me in some way today. You will likely find that something speaks to you, and it will likely be God, because God speaks in ordinary ways most of the time. Thanks be to God. Grace and peace to you. We will see you next week. You were? Dadgummit. Dadgummit.